What does it cost to run a fund on an annual basis? It sort of depends, but we all have the same basic costs. And here's kind of how this works. First of all, it costs something to set up the fund. There are attorneys who will do it for a very small amount, as low as $7,000 or $10,000, and then there are firms that do it for $500,000. And you have to know that they're not the same. What you end up getting. And you have to understand a little bit about what it is that you need. And depending on what you need, I don't think you need to go all the way to $500,000. Those would be deals that end up turning public or that are much larger, that have much more exposure, where there are broker dealers involved. Most of us are going to be, somewhere much less than that. But on an annual and ongoing basis, there's some tax that's going to be paid to the entities, the states where you do your business. So, for example, if you have an organization in California like I do, then you're going to pay the state of California $800 a year for your LLC. Other states are much less expensive. Now, it's entirely possible. What some people do is they'll set up a fund and then they'll put each piece of real estate in a subsidiary LLC, so another LLC that's owned by the primary fund or the original LLC. Each of those has to pay the state some amount of money. We don't tend to do that in California because at $800 per LLC per year, it's very expensive, but in other states, you can do that. Now, you may think that you can just go to another state, set it up, let's say Texas, $100 or something that most states are very low, that you set it up there. But if the state of California finds out that you're doing business in California or that you have an address in California or you're attached some way in California, they're going to surcharge you here anyway, so you'll end up paying in multiple states. And that could happen in other states too, that if you do business in their places, they expect tax returns, dollars, and participation, and that's called Nexus. So you have to think about Nexus in your discussion. So you have a tax fee that's payable to the states where you're doing business. The second thing is you're going to have to pay an accountant to do your tax returns. That's going to be something. You might have to have a bookkeeper that's going to do something. That could be $500 a month. It could be a lot more than that, depending on how much activity you have in your fund. You may have ongoing legal expenses to run your fund. It doesn't cost a lot on an ongoing basis for the fund. And I'm not talking about your real estate transactions, which are inside of your operating activities. I'm just talking about the fund itself. The fund may have a little bit of legal expense, shouldn't have very much, but things that trigger legal activity, for example, if you have an investor that calls you and says, I want to transfer my shares from me to my grandchildren, there might be some legal expense to facilitate that paperwork. Shouldn't be a lot, but it could be something. So there could be some ongoing legal expense, there could be some ongoing accounting expense, and then you might have some staff, or there may be some other things that happen. But by and large, that's the overhead of your fund. It should not be a lot. Now, there are some people that charge overhead to their fund. I don't think this is a good idea. I would try to keep the fund as lean as possible. One of the things that investors like is if you go and you buy a computer, you're not buying the computer for the fund, you're buying the computer for yourself, and then the fund is going to use it because you're going to do some business on that fund. I would not charge the fund for the indirect expenses, the overhead of running the office and the other kinds of activities. I would only charge for the direct expenses that are because of the fund. So a direct expense is something that is because of. So if you buy something because of the fund, if you have to go buy some signage for a building, that's because of that building, and that's a direct expense. Certainly reasonable to get reimbursed for that, but I wouldn't charge for the indirect because you're being paid fees and other kinds of opportunities, and that's really an easier way for investors to understand what you're doing. So the fund doesn't cost a great amount to run on an annual basis, but it does cost something, so factor that in. And the other thing to remember is that the fund is like a shell. It's its own shell, so there's a lot of activity happening inside. When you're doing your projections, you have to think about each building or each property is going to have some expense and whatever, then you come out to a net. But the fund also has a little bit of expense, being the umbrella, so you have to remember to add that into the expenses that you do when you're doing your overall projections. So again, not a lot. Shouldn't be on a percentage basis quite a lot, but it is something. So this is a great business. Now go out and stake your claim.